Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're overturning one of the most famous geographical stories in human history. We are talking about the lost continent of Beringia. And this isn't just your standard story about early human migration. We're talking about a massive, completely vanished world that forces us to rethink the entire landscape of the last ice age.
What's really interesting about this is the stark contrast between what we all learned in school and what the latest science actually shows. We always hear about this persistent myth, a narrow, rickety, icy land bridge that a few brave bands of hunters sprinted across in this desperate race to get from Asia to North America. But the reality? No way. Beringia was a permanent, massive, and ecologically vibrant subcontinent. We're talking about 1.6 million square kilometers. This was not a temporary transit corridor, it was a sprawling, rich grassland homeland.
Section 1. Beneath the Waves, a Vanished Continent.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer physical scale of this lost world, we kinda have to throw out our modern maps. Beringia wasn't just some tiny sliver of land connecting two shores. Geologists defined it as stretching all the way from the Lena River over in modern-day Russia straight across to the Mackenzie River in Canada. That covers what we now call the Chukchi Sea, the Bering Sea, and the Bering Strait. To put that 1.6 million square kilometers into perspective, imagine taking the entire land masses of British Columbia and Alberta and just squishing them together. That is the colossal size of the territory we're dealing with.
So, how exactly does a landmass the size of two giant Canadian provinces just magically appear? Well, it all comes down to a single number, 400. You see, during the last glacial maximum, which was roughly 20,000 years ago, these absolutely colossal continental ice sheets locked up a staggering amount of the Earth's water. And because of that, global sea levels plummeted by up to 400 feet below where they are today. As all that ocean water basically drained away, the shallow floor of the Bering Sea was completely exposed to the open air, revealing this massive, continuous dry landscape connecting Asia and North America.
Section 2. The Mammoth Steppe, Thriving Life.
Now, this newly exposed land definitely wasn't just an empty expanse of dirt and ice. It's totally counterintuitive, right? I mean, you hear Ice Age and you naturally assume everything is buried under a mile of solid ice. But in reality, Beringia was blocked from North Pacific moisture by these massive mountain ranges. So because it barely got any snowfall, it was literally just too dry for glaciers to form. Instead, it turned into this cold, windy, completely treeless grassland. We call it the Mammoth Steppe. It acted as this incredible ecological refugium, a literal safe haven full of vegetation and grasses, while the rest of North America was just locked under impenetrable ice.
And because there was all this abundant forage, the Mammoth Steppe attracted just an awe-inspiring cast of characters. We're talking a megafauna paradise. Enormous woolly mammoths lumbering across the plains, hunted by absolutely terrifying predators like the giant short-faced bear and scimitar cats. You had these massive migrating herds of steppe bison, muskox, and even wild horses, which, fun fact, actually originated in North America, thrived right here in Beringia, and galloped all over these plains. This sheer biological diversity proves that this wasn't a barren wasteland. It was a land of unbelievable opportunity, rich in resources, and absolutely buzzing with life.
Section 3. Beringian Standstill, a genetic pause.
Which naturally brings us to the human element. For decades, researchers argued over how and when people first arrived in the Americas. But this brings us to a total paradigm shift that rewrites the human timeline. I want to emphasize this quote because it really anchors the emotional core of this entire explainer. It was not merely a bridge between Siberia and Alaska, it was a homeland. The ancestors of Native Americans didn't just pack their bags and march continuously eastward in some straight line. They settled here. They built shelters, they hunted that abundant megafauna we just talked about, they sewed clothes from animal hides, and they raised families. For thousands of years, generations lived and died in a world that just so happened to also be a bridge.
And to prove this wasn't just some quick pit stop, scientists started looking deep into our genetic blueprints. This mitochondrial DNA evidence is absolutely fascinating. Take the ancient Beringians, for example. As populations moved from Asia into Beringia, they essentially got trapped. They had these massive ice sheets blocking them to the east in North America, and incredibly harsh, unforgiving conditions back west in Siberia. So during this long period of geographic isolation, which, by the way, could have lasted up to 15,000 years, their DNA naturally mutated. By the time those ice sheets finally melted and these groups migrated south to become the first Native Americans, they carried 4 totally unique genetic variations that were completely absent in their Asian ancestors. They had literally evolved into a distinct population while living in this isolated refuge. How wild is that?
Section 4. Timeline Mystery, Solving the Dates. So the genetics definitively tell us they were living there. But when exactly was this bridge open and actually habitable? That timeline has honestly been one of the biggest mysteries in Earth sciences. So the crucial point is how scientists actually figured out when the ocean gateway was closed. They approached it from a brilliant ocean perspective by tracking the marine nitrogen cycle. It's an incredibly elegant method. Let's break it down. Step 1. The Pacific Ocean naturally sends high amounts of this rare isotope, nitrogen-15, moving northward. Step 2. If a giant land bridge forms, it acts like a massive physical dam, totally blocking that Pacific water from getting into the Arctic Ocean. And step 3. If we look at ancient Arctic sediments, a sharp drop in nitrogen-15 levels essentially acts as a timestamp. It tells us exactly when that bridge was standing tall and blocking the flow.
But wait, how on earth do we measure ocean nitrogen levels from tens of thousands of years ago? Well, enter our microscopic detectives, foraminifera. These are fossilized zooplankton shells, and they were pulled up from deep Arctic seafloor sediments during this really revolutionary 1994 Coast Guard icebreaker expedition. The fossilized organic tissue preserved inside these tiny carbonate shells perfectly records the nitrogen-15 ratios of the exact water they lived in. By radiocarbon dating these shells, scientists can literally read the ocean's nitrogen levels over the last 50,000 years, almost like turning the pages in a history book.
Now, the final puzzle piece for figuring out this timeline is sea level modeling, because it turns out the ocean doesn't just fill up evenly like a bathtub. And this brilliantly illustrates why. A phenomenon called glacial isostatic adjustment. Basically, continental ice sheets are so incredibly heavy that they physically deform the Earth's crust. Think of it exactly like punching down a ball of elastic bread dough. The crust gets pushed down directly beneath the heavy ice, but it bulges and lifts up all around the edges. When you combine this kind of crustal deformation with the actual gravitational pull of the massive ice sheets themselves, local sea levels at the Bering Strait fluctuated in some really complex, completely uneven ways.
So, when researchers finally combined that nitrogen-15 data with these crustal deformation models, they revealed this surprising new timeline. For years, the standard model, what we call the sawtooth climate model, suggested the bridge formed super slowly, over tens of thousands of years. But this new data? It shows the strait was completely flooded 50,000 years ago. The land bridge actually only formed around 36,000 years ago. It existed for a much shorter, much more concentrated window before being totally flooded again about 11,000 years ago. This monumental discovery completely turns our older assumptions about how quickly ice sheets grew right before the last glacial maximum totally on their head.
Section 5. The drowning. End of an era.
Because all things, no matter how permanent they seem to the people living there, eventually change. As the Ice Age finally broke and global temperatures started to rise around 14,500 years ago, those massive ice sheets began their inevitable, incredibly uneven retreat. And this unleashed an immense, catastrophic surge of glacial meltwater straight into the world's oceans. Sea levels rose rapidly, and they just consumed the Mammoth Steppe. The great grazing herds either vanished or had to migrate, and the humans who called this place home, they were forced to press eastward into the Americas or retreat back west into Siberia. The hearth fires, the stone tools, the bones of the hunted, all of it sank permanently beneath those frigid waves. Today, it leaves behind only a few scattered peaks, like the Diomede Islands, standing as the very last physical memories of a lost continent.
We've mapped genetics, marine nitrogen cycles, and literally the deformation of the Earth's crust to rediscover this drowned continent. It's a powerful reminder that the maps we completely take for granted today are really just temporary snapshots in geologic time. So I'll leave you with this thought to take away. As we map the flooded homeland of the first Americans, what other hidden histories and completely lost worlds are lying quietly on the ocean floor, just waiting to reshape our entire understanding of the past? Keep exploring, and thanks for joining me for this explainer.